Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world here. I'm going to give folks 30 more seconds. Still some folks coming in, so as soon as they do, we'll get started. All righty. Well, as I said, good afternoon or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Really appreciate your joining us today to talk about effective OT security governance. We're going to spend some time talking about how to organize and achieve success from a governance perspective around OT security. We've done this. We did an earlier morning in the US version of this, and some questions. Initial questions were around what does OT mean? So maybe I'll just quickly define that before we start. OT is also referred to as operational technology. So these are the technologies that operate physical processes, particularly in industrial operations of one form or another mostly. So they would be power plants, chemical refineries, pharmaceutical facilities, could include building controls, even could extend out into medical devices and that sort of thing in a hospital. But broadly defined, software and hardware that somehow controls physical processes or operational processes. So that's OT. And obviously a little different from traditional IT, and we'll talk about that. So quick introduction. So I'm John Livingston. I'm the CEO of Verve Industrial. I'll talk about us in a second here. I've been with Verve for a little over 5 years. Prior to that, I spent about 21 years or so with McKinsey & Company, the global management consulting firm. And a lot of our work there was around, frankly, designing governance processes, designing organizational models. And a lot of that work was around digital transformations in the industrial environment. And so it's interesting now to put that experience now with the world of industrial cybersecurity, as a lot of the challenges around digitization are around the security of those connectivity. And particularly this topic of governance allows me to sort of put my McKinsey hat on along with the Verve hat and talk about how do we bring some of those same concepts around governance modeling into the world of industrial security. Just by way of introduction to Verve itself, we've been in business for almost 30 years. We started as an industrial control system programming firm, so designing ICS systems in power and water and steel and other industries. And then about 15 years ago, we launched the first version of what's known as the Verve Security Center, which essentially is a security management platform specifically focused around industrial environments, OT systems. And from those experiences, we help our clients a lot from a services point of view, helping them maintain their security, improve it over time. But that experience has given us a lot of insights and perspectives around governance models and what works and what doesn't in trying to improve the security of OT systems. And so we're really building on that experience as we talk through this today, both good and bad, both success stories and some non-success stories, and we'll talk about that. There is a Q&A panel there, so please, if you have questions, post them in the Q&A. We're going to try and leave some time at the end to answer some of those questions. And as usual, we will be providing both the PowerPoint here to everyone, as well as a video of this session. So as we get started, when we think about governance, a lot of times what we hear, and frankly, what our clients have told us they've heard elsewhere, is a set of things. And this may or may not sound familiar to you, but these are the kinds of things that one typically hears around OT security. Firstly, from IT, we've got this. We know how to do cybersecurity, been doing cybersecurity for years. We'll just apply that into the OT world. Or a debate about standards, right? Well, we've got NIST, we've got various various elements of NIST, all the various subcomponents of NIST, 800, 171, 52, et cetera. We have CIS top 20 or now top 18, IEC 62443. So debates about, oh, well, what should we use in OT? Who's going to do all of this, right? So how do we find the people? We don't have resources at this point. So how do we do that? Big questions around budgets. So it's not in my budget, right? Who's going to pay for all these new firewalls, for instance, that now we need at the plant, right? That's not in the plant budget. We didn't plan to update all of our networking equipment. So where's that budget going to come from? A lot of times what we hear is, hey, we rely on OEMs and our vendors for managing our control systems. And so they're really responsible for the security. And so let them handle this. There's other, as I said, in these digitization processes, other folks who are looking at our whole digital program. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be digitizing the plants. And therefore, we'll be applying security 3 to 5 years over the next 3 to 5 years. That may or may not fit with the timing of the attackers, et cetera, and needing to take downtime, et cetera. And what that leads to oftentimes is false starts, right? So we see a lot of organizations get part of the way down the road, for instance, on a network segmentation project, right? And then it stalls. And it stalls because, well, we got to take outages to really move systems that are on the OT side behind those firewalls. We have to re-IP things. Frankly, we don't even know what's out there. So it's hard to do the segmentation without knowing that. A lot of times we see organizations that get kind of caught in this assessment process, and they're debating standards, and they're trying to align on what are the biggest risks. And it becomes a long conversation without a lot of action. And then finally, some organizations, great, we're on it. We're going to do these things. But then when it comes down to what's the budget to do it, no one wants to really allocate the required resources to get it done. And so based on all of this, we believe that governance, organizational mindset, et cetera, is really the critical element to making this happen. You can have all the technology in the world, you can do great assessments, but if we don't get that organizational governance right, we're not going to be able to make a lot of progress. And so it really becomes the foundation to success of an OT security management program. Just to start with, the reality is we've really got to start making progress quickly. For those of you who may have seen some of our prior webinars, we talk about this as the air raid that is hitting OT systems or industrial systems. Right? We've got a significant increase in the amount of attackers focused on ICS or industrial control systems. We'll talk more about that, but these commercial hackers are coming after our systems as a way to make money. IT is now becoming a greater part of OT, meaning we have more security risks as a result of that as those worlds collide. Regulators are changing the way they think about this, so a significant increase in compliance pressure. Recent TSA here in the United States applying standards. This is true around the world, though. Chile is applying NERC CIP. Brazil has new standards, the NIST directives, et cetera. The resource constraint is growing. It's growing for two reasons. Number one, because operationally, we're asking people to do more with fewer people. But at the same time, vulnerabilities are growing, right? We saw a 50 to 60% increase in the number of OT specific vulnerabilities in the last year. And so the risks and the vulnerabilities are growing just as we're reducing headcount. Access, so remote access is becoming a greater risk. The whole IIoT digital transformations create more risk. Insurers are now starting to require cybersecurity and OT to gain that insurance coverage. And then finally, obviously, directors are starting to raise questions about what we're doing around our industrial processes. But this concept of the air raid means that we can't take 3 years to debate a standard or to align on where we want to go and to make progress. The reality is this is going to move quickly. And so we need to find a governance model that allows industrial organizations to move more quickly. To the point of urgency, industrial organizations are now, directly in the crosshairs, right? So this is 2019 to 2020 data. We'll be getting 2021 data here pretty soon. But the point is that, manufacturing and energy have moved from 8th and 9th, respectively, to 2nd and 3rd. And this is our expectation is this will be, potentially number one in 2021. We are seeing a significant increase in the amount of threats to these industrial environments. And 2/3 of these things can actually cause disruptions in operations. The reality is it's a very different strategic environment. Cybersecurity is a very different strategic setup or situation than the traditional industrial operations, right? So if we think about the way we've run operations historically, think about competition firstly. Well, we certainly have competitors, but our competitors are trying to beat us in the marketplace with customers. They are not trying to disrupt directly our operations, right? They are not coming in and trying to attack our plants or our factories. Certainly, they may try and disrupt us from the standpoint of, getting an edge on a supply chain situation or whatever. That's a very different environment where in cybersecurity, right? We have a direct competitor in an attacker, right? They are actively trying to disrupt us. They have none of the same constraints, right? So in many cases, our competition in industrial operations, they have a lot of the same constraints, right? They have regulations, they have to do quality control, safety control. Attackers have none of that, right? They are just trying to disrupt our operations in any way they can with none of those constraints. So suddenly, industrial operators face this true threat that is very different from a competitor attacking our markets. Similarly, the pace of change is different, right? 10 to 20-year life cycles, long planning. Change, frankly, causes problems, right? We want to keep things the same. Whereas in cybersecurity, these vulnerabilities are coming out every week, right? We now have the Log4j recent event here over the last 48 hours or so, 72 hours. And without change, these risks grow, right? So change actually creates protection, not risk. So that's a very different strategic situation. Similarly, cross-plant dependence, right? In many organizations, they are run with the plant being a bit of an island, not completely, right? They'll supply other parts of the supply chain, certainly. But from a network point of view or an operational point of view, you've got a plant manager that runs that P&L. Well, in cybersecurity, suddenly these plants are now dependent on one another, right? If they're networked together and I get an attack in one place, it spreads to the rest of the environment, right? So I'm only as strong as my weakest link, which again changes the dynamic of the way we think about governance. Operational focus, right? So historically, in many organizations, not everyone, obviously, but in many organizations, they have focused on critical expertise like the design or the manufacturing expertise. And they've said things like control systems, we outsource that, right? To a vendor, to an OEM, et cetera. All of a sudden, when cybersecurity comes around, it's those control systems are the things that are at risk. And so now I actually need to really understand and have people who I trust really understand that control systems and how they work together, because that's where the threat happens. And so as we step back on this, it causes us to say, we need to rethink the way we approach governance for cybersecurity industrial than the way we've historically approached governance for running operations. And that means some difficult, tough conversations that have to happen at the C-suite. So how do we do this? And this is where I'm going to go back a little bit to my McKinsey experience. McKinsey developed this model called the 7S framework. And it was originally put down on paper in a book called In Search of Excellence back probably in the late 70s, early 80s. And it basically went through what are the elements of governance that make for successful organizations. And clearly from this page, you can see they all interrelate, right? These 7 S's all work together. And you can't have, if you don't have alignment among them, things break down. And so what we're going to do is apply this same framework now to the world of industrial cybersecurity to walk through, okay, how do we think about the integration of these 7 elements to form the right governance model of what we need to do? And so what that starts with, I'm going to start with strategy, which is at 11 o'clock there, because oftentimes what is said is strategy drives the rest of this. But that in an OT security point of view is being clear about our goals. What is that portfolio or prioritized set of initiatives that I'm going to take, and how are we going to execute on those? So I need to define that goal and set of initiatives. I then need to define a structure that allows us to achieve those goals. Typically, you think of this as RACIs or reporting processes, reporting structures, and tasks that different parts of an organization would take. On the systems front, then, what technology systems do I need? So what software, hardware, et cetera, do I need that enable me to measure and monitor and do performance management? And then what human processes or systems do I need that allow us to do that? Things like having balanced scorecards, et cetera. Then on the bottom of this framework are the 4 S's that are quote unquote softer S's. Starts with style. So what's the way we make decisions? Is the organization top down, collaborative, whatever? And that has implications on how we think about OT security, right? Is this going to be the kind of thing where we're going to come down from the top and say, this is exactly what we're going to do at every plant? Or is this going to be more around the plants deciding what they're going to do? And that's an important understanding for the organization about how to design governance. What's the right staff? What kinds of people are we going to need, and how many of them? Skills, really important, right? We can get off the rails quickly if we're not clear on what skills we need to achieve OT security. And then finally, that center S, the shared values. This is, you could think of this in part as the ethics of the organization, but in more than that, it's really about what is important. What is the North Star? What are the core principles that define how we work and what our priorities are? So we're going to talk about these various elements as to how an organization can leverage this framework to help build the right governance model for it. Just to start with, a couple of examples of this, right? A couple of successful examples to show you how different they can be, but how the alignment around those 7 S's is key for success. So one example was a highly decentralized company, right? So their style was very much one where they said, look, the accountability is at the business unit. Their values were that entrepreneur that runs their business unit needs to be given the authority to do what they need to do. And so in this case, the CISO, who was supported by the senior management team, established targets. So essentially establish the what, where do we want to go? And then they let the business units pursue that target in the way they felt was most effective for that business unit. They created a system, right, which was a review process where they could review how the business units were going at it and whether they were achieving their goals. And they left the definition of how much staff, what skills, et cetera, to those business units. And then they would assess them on an annual basis. Very successful, but very different from option number 2, example number 2, which was a very matrixed organization. Their style was much more one of, we're going to bring everybody together. We're going to align on an integrated approach. And then we're going to basically pilot something in one of our business units. And then we're going to rinse and repeat that process across the rest in a rollout in a staged process. It was longer than the first one. I mean, it took a little bit longer because that initial problem solving and alignment took a long time. But as they did it, they then had an agreed upon approach that they were then just replicating as they went across. And so there they defined the skills and they centralized the skills, they centralized the staff, et cetera. It worked for them because they aligned the pieces around their style and set of shared values. So what we're encouraging you to think about is there is no one size fits all to this. You need to understand what type of organization are you and then build the governance model that fits for you. So we're going to talk about what are the principles behind that. And so we've simplified our framework down a little bit to 5, integrating a couple of these together. So we're going to start with shared values. We start here because without this, the project will fail almost inevitably. If we are not clear about having a shared perspective as a senior team that then can be driven down to the rest of the organizations, OT security will not happen. And so how do we do that? Well, we got to get shared understanding of what the risks are, right? And so there's a couple of things we can do to do that, right? The first is look at survey data. So this survey data is from the SANS ICS security survey. And what they do is they go through and they interview ICS security practitioners. And so on the left-hand side, what we see is, according to practitioners, people in the space, there is a significantly higher risk today, 2021, than there was 2 years ago for OT security. And then similarly, they also ask, where is the greatest risk vector? And I think this is really an important point. A lot of times when you talk to management teams, you'll get the perspective of, well, we're not really a target, right? Who would want to attack us, right? We're not critical, really. We're a manufacturing company. We're not going to be attacked by Russia or North Korea or whatever, right? Reality is that now by far the greatest threat vector is coming out of ransomware. And that is not about whether you're critically strategic or not. That is about how much money they can make from you. And so fundamentally, the risk perspective has to change as to who's at risk. Essentially, every industrial operation is at risk of an attack because there is money to be made. They have now figured out that there is a very, very high profitability as a ransomware organization to go after industrial operations. So that starts to set the base of how to gain alignment around this. Then we bring that back to, okay, well, what does this mean for operations? Well, ransomware is a very, very expensive thing, right? These are examples here just in the last 18 months or so of the kinds of downtime that we've seen from these events. And so it's important that we raise the awareness to start to get that alignment of, is this a real threat to us or not, right? By the way, it's fine if they say it's not, we don't want to pursue this. Okay, but let's agree on that up front. But if it is something we want to look at, let's understand how much risk that there really exists. And the dollars can be very substantial. And then we start to think about our own environments. And while we'll talk more about the strategy piece here in a second and how to think about the assessment side, but what we know, even if we just sat in a room and we didn't do any assessing at all, I think we're probably going to sit down and realize, yeah, actually, if we think about our OT environments, yeah, we probably do have a lot of shared passwords. Yeah, I know that these plants are, going around, they got NICs we got dual NICs so that people can get around firewall rules, et cetera. For a variety of reasons, remote access, et cetera. Our remote access probably isn't as well managed as we'd like it to be. We know we're not patching, right, at a robust rate. And so as we start to put down the reality of our security situation against those risks, most of the time, you very quickly get to the point, yeah, we're probably at risk. How much at risk? Not quite clear yet, but we're certainly probably not doing all the things that you would want to do from a security point of view. And so then trying to bring that down to a specific financial and operational impact, right? So what's the cost of downtime of the plant, right? Okay, $200,000 a day. All right, well, if we get hit by ransomware and we're down for a week, what does that turn into, right? Then there's operational risks from a customer relationship point of view or delivery point of view, right? I got an upstream plant that goes down and all of a sudden the downstream plants can't produce. Or obviously safety and regulatory risks. So being able to take that general industry risk, right, and start to apply it if we were attacked and if they did succeed, what are the types of events, what are types of impact that could have on us? And that starts to create alignment, right, at least at a beginning level. Now, we often say that initial shared values has to work together with your strategy, right? Because we need to understand not just at the high level what we think are getting that alignment, but then we got to get even more specific, which really involves the strategy. around where are our real risks. Let's get very specific about our risks. And so what the strategy piece is then defining those clear objectives and a portfolio of initiatives to get there. So first, there's lots of frameworks out there. Our strong view is to start with a framework, or find, if you want to take an integrated set of NIST plus certain parts of IEC 62443, let's say, but to begin with a framework. The framework allows people to start speaking the same language. None of the frameworks is perfect, right? And by the way, we're not recommending that you become a slave to the framework. By the same token, having that framework allows that alignment again, right? Allows people to start using the same language about understanding their risks and what those are. But we also recognize, and by the way, your operations folks will tell you, OT is different, right? We're not talking about traditional IT. And so therefore, the frameworks that we use need to be modeled differently. Most of this legacy equipment is not going to allow us to do things we could do in IT, right? We can't scan these things for vulnerabilities, right? You want a Nessus scanner on an OT system, and you're going to bring down that plant, or at least brick some of the PLCs. 70% of these devices aren't Windows-based, and IT security tools weren't designed for embedded proprietary controls running down there, 450 or more different proprietary protocols. Right? They're not meant for systems that are 8, 10, 15 years old. And if we start to think about, deploying automated EDR tools, well, the risks of having a type 2 error there, meaning we think we see a threat and we react to it automatically, and all of a sudden you shut down the plant, has pretty big financial implications. So we have to take a different approach to those standards in the OT world. One of those things that we can do, again, that we think is quite helpful in this, is when we take a framework, and this is an example of the CIS, right? Number one, inventory of hardware assets. Seems like it should be pretty straightforward. Great, we're going to inventory those assets. Yeah, but in OT, we need to think about what are we going to need to adjust in that framework. So for instance, DHCP, are we really going to apply that or not? Well, in a lot of cases, it's really not appropriate in ICS, in that OT environment. So, okay, maybe we're not going to apply that control, that subcontrol, or port control, right? Port level access control. A lot of OEM vendors won't allow you to use port access control 802.1x on their systems. So again, we need to think about adjusting those frameworks in a way that makes them OT specific. Good news is a lot of this work has been done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Happy to talk more about that. But there are ways of adjusting these frameworks so you can make it OT specific and be able to then jump off your starting point from your strategy from a common language. As we then think about building that strategy, one of the things that's key to this for industrial operations is to think about our strategy in how am I going to move from red to green, right? I mean, operations is all about metrics. It's all about improving my performance, whether it be quality output, whether it be, parts per hour or dollars per part or whatever it happens to be. And am I making progress on achieving my goal? Well, in cybersecurity, we need to do that same thing for our strategy in cyber. We need to allow people to see where we red and where we green, and then how are we going to move from red to green over time. And so this is just one example of that. This is, configuration checks on devices, and we can set up, and this is a dashboard from the Verve Security Center, but we can take this for compliance of configuration. You could do it for users and accounts. You could do for patches, anything you want. But to be able to say, against the goal, against our standard, against our framework, where are we red and where are we green, so we can over time manage that. But that's the first part of what we needed. We needed to find where are we red today? Where do we have big gaps? And that's where the assessment comes in, right? So I talked at the beginning about shared values and beginning to build that alignment. Well, that alignment starts to really get built once I put in place that assessment, once I get deep into the OT environment and I can see what are my risks, not just what are theoretically risks that we might have, but what are our specific risks. And the way we do that, and we're not going to talk in gory detail about the tech-enabled assessment here. We've done other webinars on that. We welcome you to go to our website and you can see those. But basically, the concept here is once we've aligned on that framework, to then be able to go down into those systems and gather data directly from all the endpoints. And that allows us to see what are our real risks. Do we have lots of dormant users? Do we have remote access that's being used that we're not monitoring? Do we have specific vulnerabilities, specific unpatched systems, et cetera, et cetera? And to be able to put all of that into an integrated perspective that says these are our prioritized risks in our environment at a plant by plant, asset by asset basis, and then use that to develop our roadmap. Because then I can make that roadmap really specific. I can know not just high level, I want to do these things at that plant. Here are these set of specific tactics. I have to remove those dual NICs from that machine. I need to reconfigure that firewall. I need to patch these systems, remove these accounts, et cetera. And that roadmap then starts to establish our strategy. It starts to allow us to build a governance model and frankly, an alignment around what are the problems that we need to achieve and what are we going to do to fix them. And that risk assessment, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this page, but we'll have it in the document. That risk assessment, and this is the defense in depth concept, allows you then to break down where are my risks, right? So I can start to prioritize what I'm going to do against it. Once I understand those risks, then again, the strategy has to come back to, well, what are my threats? And this is an example of the kind of threat matrix that one could build, where you say, okay, what are the possible threats? What is therefore the vulnerability vector? What's the vulnerability vector they're going to attack with? What is the operational impact of that? What can I do about it? What would I do to respond to that? And then finally, what's the timing? Okay, how long is it going to take me to respond to that? And what I can then do is to start to put those dollars to things, right? I can start to say, here is the potential impact of that kind of an event. The reason this is important in our governance model is if I don't know what I need to go fix, I don't know how to govern it. I don't know how to model it. I don't know how to manage it, right? I need to be able to say, these are the things I'm trying to fix, so I can then build a governance model to go fix them. And that's what this chart shows is we would lay out over time a set of initiatives, often referred to as a portfolio of initiatives, that I'm going to implement over time to improve my security posture on a robust, continuous basis over time. And that roadmap then allows me to define, okay, here's my objectives. And from a governance point of view, here's what I'm going to hold people accountable to. And we're going to come back to that. And here's the systems I need to be able to manage that and monitor that. But the strategy sets the stage for that. Okay, so I got alignment, and that strategy really helps define that alignment because I'm doing that strategy with that senior team. Okay, I got alignment. Now I've got to understand how I'm going to structure the team to go at this. What's the organizational model? And the way we think about this is what we call think global, act local. It allows you to bring IT and OT together. It allows you to scale. So to bring consolidation of analysis and prioritization, but also allows you to have the understanding that these OT systems are sensitive and they need process control expertise before you start taking actions. So the act local part, meaning act in a way where the control is put in the hands of the process control people who know that process best. So we'll talk through this a little bit. So typically what we find when we start is the organization has a range of different parts that are trying to attack this problem. It's the old elephant story, right? I see a part of the elephant, but I don't see the whole thing. And so, a network organization may be managing the enterprise switches and firewalls, the wide area networks that we may use from OT to go to our MES systems, for instance. The I&C folks or the operations people are managing the process control elements, the ladder logic and the PLCs, the DCS, the balance of plant. Security is probably managing the perimeter networks, right? And doing the firewall rules at the perimeter. They're probably doing the detection, the IDS, et cetera. The OT systems themselves, meaning the apps, the configurations, et cetera, of those devices, oftentimes aren't managed at all. And we don't really know what the configuration of those devices are in many cases. And from a patching point of view, they're probably not all that updated because of the challenges of patching. And then certainly there's limited OT resources that really understand the IT sysadmin kind of jobs, right? It's often, it's rare that we find folks who are deep Windows admin or Cisco admin type folks sitting in the OT plant environments. And so you have this balkanization, as it were, this siloing, whatever, of these different functions. So part of the structure needs to bring those groups together. And it's important as we do this that we recognize that industrial security is more than OT security. So we've talked a lot about OT security, but when we think about really protecting a plant or frankly, the train operations or an airport or whatever, it's not just the OT systems, but ransomware moves from IT into OT. So we got to think about how we're protecting IT. Production is often reliant on IT systems, right? So the whole Colonial Pipeline issue that happened in the United States, it really wasn't an OT event. It was an IT event, but OT couldn't operate because they couldn't bill for it. And so there are key IT systems that we need to be thinking about. How do they fit together with OT? Oftentimes our plant IT systems are connecting to OT and vice versa. HVAC systems or refrigeration systems, often critical, but aren't maybe thought of as quote unquote OT. A lot of times IT has skills that we could leverage from a security point of view if somehow they could get access to information without doing things that from a production point of view, we don't want them to do, et cetera. Point is that we need to find ways to bring these groups together. And so that's this concept of think global, act local in our mind. So IT helps us think globally, meaning establishing our standards and policies, analyzing vulnerabilities and risks, right? Why would we want to build vulnerability detection teams at every single plant if we have 100 plants around the world, right? That's crazy. Let's find a group centrally that can do that. From a remediation planning, right? Again, let's centralize that. People who know how to do that. They've been doing that for years in IT security, doing threat detection, et cetera. The same time on the right-hand side of this chart, right? We got to make sure that what we don't have happen is somebody sitting thousands of miles away starting to patch our DCS systems and potentially doing that at a time when some critical process is running. And so what we need to do is act what we say locally, meaning within the control of the process control people who know their systems best. That may be physically local, or it may not be actually physically local, but in the sense of locally understanding the process, who can determine, okay, is this the right time to remediate? Can we execute those actions on the right systems at the right time? Supporting incident response in an event, so that because they'll know the process and what you can do and what you can't, et cetera. And so then IT and OT come together in this structure to work hand in glove, to be able to think globally and leverage those capabilities we have in IT and security, while also making sure from an OT point of view that we're careful on the systems. And how do we do that? So we've got a range of things that we do, what we call field and forum. So a lot of times we'll be working with organizations on, kind of team room workshop type things, but then also going out in the field and bringing IT personnel to the field to see the whys. Why can we or can't we do that? And to build trust among these different groups. We, on this page up here, we put structure and style together for a reason, right? We think that the structure part of this aligns closely with what's the style and the way we work. In other words, are we going to make this distributed or not? Are we going to have this hierarchical or not? And this think global, act local allows us to recognize the style we need to pursue, which is having process control people control their processes while also scaling up in a greater way. So what does that look like in practice? We're going to talk through a little bit of that. So think global, as I mentioned, scale analysis in a central team, allows you to prioritize things, allows you to build playbooks, et cetera. Oftentimes organizations will need something in the middle, a regional group. Again, this really depends on the scale of your organization. Many global organizations will want some sort of regional SME kind of function. But then that local piece, right? Being able to do the endpoint management action locally, automated, meaning allowing those folks to have automated tools to do these things. So they're not walking around the plant floor with a USB stick. By the same token, in their control. So before that remediation action is run, we test it, we decide on when, and then we execute it in an automated fashion. So this allows you to do several things. Number one, this structure allows you to lower labor costs. I can now scale my analytics pieces. It allows me to be operationally safe and efficient, right? So I'm not going to start taking these actions from thousands of miles away without controls. Third, it allows me to get that deep visibility, so inventorying way down the network, but then centralizing that into a central platform so that I can see everything centrally and know how I'm doing, right? I'm going to have to manage this from a governance point of view. Better risk management allows me to make trade-offs across all the different risks. And then finally, allows me to do rapid response. So I can see an event, I can see a vulnerability, I can then take action, but that action again is controlled by process controls engineers. So our view is that structure of think global, act local aligns with the style of industrial organizations well, and allows us to achieve the scale we need while achieving the resilience and reliability we need. So I won't go through this page in detail, but this will be in the document. And these are the kinds of activities that we see happening at the different levels of a plant, of an industrial organization. And then finally on the structure, making sure that we assign specific tasks for each of the roles. So if you just get to, okay, great, somebody in the IT team is going to do this, and somebody in process control team is going to patch or is going to harden configs or whatever, it fails, right? So we got to get down to specific tasks by role, essentially RACIs, for who's going to be doing these various things. This is just one example of what that would look like. But the concept here is to get specific tasks that have to happen, specific task IDs, and then align those to individual roles. And so what you end up with is some structure, right? And this is an example of an organization where what they did is they said, okay, we're going to have this structure. We're going to have regional plant, as you can see there at the bottom left, regional plant folks who are the SMEs. And then we're going to have, under the ops group, we're going to have process control leads at each site who are going to be doing those actions we talked about, the local actions. And then underneath the CISO, we're going to be gathering all that data up. In this case, they actually put one of their former process control leaders in that director of security architecture role. And then that director of security insights was gathering all of that security information and prioritizing it. So this is one example of an org model. There could be a lot of them. But again, that concept of we're pulling it up globally, but then we're acting locally. Okay, so what kind of staff and skills do we need to pull that off, right? The next piece of governance. We all know, I mean, this is something that I think is pretty well known at this point. This was a survey done a couple of years ago. I think it's only more true today. The biggest obstacle in this is people, right? We don't have the resources and the expertise to pull this off. And so where do we find them? So the first point we'd make is when we think about the skills that we need to focus on what we refer to as OT systems management skills. This data is from the NIST CyberSeek database. And basically what they do is they take all the open positions out there for cybersecurity jobs, and they break them down by function, by skills. And what you see here is over 3/4 of the skills you're going to need are in what could best be referred to as systems management functions. Network provisioning, patch management, updating AV, backup management, et cetera. Only about 15% of them fit into what we might tend to think of as the machine learning, advanced analytics type folks. Now, again, those are critical tasks, critical jobs, critical functions. But oftentimes, all of the focus ends up being at the bottom of this page. And we think, oh, the only thing we need, or the only way we're going to be able to do this is we need all these hackers who can come in and hack and figure this. The reality is 75% of our tasks are on the top of this page. And as we think about the skills, we can find these people, right? They exist in the world. We need to train them on OT, no question. Or we can find OT people and train them on these things. But the point is, their systems management skills, 75% of those things we're going to need are there. And that's where our vast majority of our efforts need to be when we think about the skills part of this. And then when we think about staff, this is just one example of an organization that had about 50 plants around the world. They broke up the work into the remediate phase and the maintain phase. Remediate was kind of a one-time thing. And then they broke their plants into bronze, silver, and gold, meaning, gold being the most criticals, who were going to get a much higher level of security than the bronze and the silvers. And then they said, okay, how many hours is it going to take us to remediate each of those sites? And then similarly, how many hours a month is it going to take us to maintain it? And then down below, they did the same with the regional and the central FTEs. So they got down to a very specific organization model, number of people by the type of activity that they were going to do, partly for budgeting, right? But also partly to know who was going to be doing what, right? From a staff point of view. And so as we think about those two next S's, the staff and the skills, right? It's OT systems management on the skills front, and then breaking down that staff and seeing, as you can see here, we can really scale it because of the Think Global, Act Local approach to the amount of people we need, because we're going to get it down to, 5 or 6 folks across an organization that are really going to be the ones who are driving the security management. Finally, the systems, right? And systems have 2 parts to it, right? One is the technology systems, and the other is the human processes. So I'm going to start with the technology. Our strong view is if you're going to do this model, if you're really going to get governance right, we need to have a Think Global, Act Local platform that allows us to do this, right? Verve is one of those. We're not the only one. You can think about which one you want to use. The point is to have a platform that can aggregate all your data across every plant, every asset, every substation, whatever it is that you operate, into an enterprise console. It needs to be done vendor agnostic, right? You need to be able to get your Emerson, your GE, your ABBs, your Factory Talk, your Toshiba, everything into one platform. That platform then needs to be able to enable those local actions again, right? The act local part. It can't be just an IT tool where you're going to patch from 2,000 miles away. We need a platform that allows that local group to have automated actions, but have control over those. Automated inventory, so we can essentially monitor as we go, right? We want to be able to see that red to green. And so the platform needs to enable that, and then obviously provide threat detection. But this is in our view, a key part of making the governance work. If we don't have the data and a way to manage it and a way to actually take actions, the governance breaks down. And what that platform allows you to do, back to the very early parts of the presentation, allows you to go at those things we know we're going to find and fix them, right? It allows you to identify those passwords or accounts that shouldn't be there and remediate that, whether it be remove the account, reset the password. It allows you to remove risky software. We're all waking up to this Log4j thing, right? Okay, let's go remove the software we don't need that's running that stuff. And there is a lot of software we don't need running on these control systems. And then on the detection and response side, allows us to alert on microsegments if they're breached. It allows to deploy and monitor canaries. When ransomware accesses a canary file, we can see that and send an alert. The point is that platform allows us to centralize and scale these things. And then obviously, because IT and OT need to work together, that platform needs to work with the IT security management platform, right? We need to be able to interface with Splunk or with your CMDB. Similarly, that platform needs to bring data in from those other tools, right? It's not just a one-way outbound, but we have to bring in OEM patches, right? So OEMs don't approve every patch. Well, let's get that into the OTSM platform so we can see that. We need to bring in backup data to know if systems are backed up, AV data to know if AV is up to date, et cetera. And so that platform needs to integrate between IT and OT. And then from the process point of view of systems, performance is all, governance comes back to performance management, right? If we're not managing the performance, we're not going to get it. And so our view is we need to make security part of the balanced scorecard. So every industrial operator has been working with the concept of balanced scorecards for years, right? It's not just what's the volume and profit you're making, but it's also things like the value for the price, the quality, and importantly, things at the bottom here, like safety and retaining talent, right? This model is in existence. What we now need to do is to put a box in here, so to speak, that's about security. Because if the manufacturing team does not have accountability, if they don't have something in their scorecard that says they're being held accountable for security, when we need that person to be moved into doing some activity from a systems management point of view, it's going to be very difficult to get them if there's not alignment on those balanced scorecards. And then we need to measure, right? That system needs to allow us to measure how we're doing to be able to feed back to those manufacturing personnel, as well as the security personnel. How we doing? Are we red or green on vulnerabilities, on patches, on configurations, et cetera? And measure that on a real-time basis. So we know weekly, daily, how we're doing. Again, ops is about red to green and being able to allow that kind of function. And then finally measuring that more holistically over time, right? And so this is one of our clients who measured it at the beginning before they got started, right? And that's the blues. And then they measured against the NIST cybersecurity framework after about a year to say, okay, how are we doing overall? So great, we've got the individual metrics, we got our reds and greens, but overall, how are we doing across the organization? And so that then ties the governance model back together again, right? Is where I now have a way of systems. I have the systems, both the technology systems and the performance management systems, to measure how I'm doing against that ultimate objective. And so I'm just going to go back to the top here for a moment and kind of just summarize where we've been, right? So these five keep these principles, right? Aligning on our shared values, making sure I have that alignment at the top, being clear about my strategy. Without clarity of my portfolio of initiatives and timing, et cetera, I'm not going to get there. Think global, act local, right? So making sure I can centralize the thinking and the analysis and localize the actions. Building OT systems management skills. And then finally, from a systems point of view, having the right technology in place that allows you to do think global, act local, but also the performance management systems that allow us to hold people accountable. So with that, I know we're only going to have a couple minutes for questions. So Victor is asking about checking his environment for Log4Shell vulnerability. So all that is coming out. There's that vulnerability is literally just been released whenever it was over the weekend. We need to, so Victor, probably a longer conversation, that gets updated in the vulnerability information, which can be downloaded and then be looked at against the database. And then there's a bunch of things we need to do with that, because a lot of these vulnerabilities are not public yet, right? So this vulnerability is, but not the applications in which this vulnerability exists. And so we can talk through exactly how we're helping our clients deal with that fact, because this vulnerability is a very unique one in how much it's embedded in other people's systems. And so far, a lot of systems haven't actually announced that they're vulnerable yet. And so we have a way to go in and actually find vulnerable systems that may not quite have been announced yet. So probably something we can take offline, Victor. Are we bidirectionally sharing data across integrated vendor systems? Sorry, I think I understand what you're saying. So does a platform like this need to bidirectionally share data? So the way that this platform works, again, each platform is probably different, but our platform is we do not bidirectionally share. So in other words, the data from inside the facility, inside the plant, is one way outbound to that Think Global concept, right? So we do not want the Think Global platform to be able to go inbound and start going bidirectional in. That's in our view, a break of all sorts of various security models, not to mention operational concerns if that central team is starting to take actions. Hence, that's the act local part, right? So those actions are contained locally at the site. And so the only way to get to those would be through some form of remote access, et cetera. In many places, our clients are actually using diodes for that structure. There's some, oh, sorry, those are just all things about that. One other question that we got beforehand in this was, we're seeing a diminishing perimeters between IT and OT, i.e. more IT-OT convergence, et cetera. How does that affect the governance as we get access to more data, OT and IT more data? So our view is the way that impacts this is, as those barriers come down and we start to get more convergence, two things happen. Number one is the security risks go up, right? But also, we really need to start having IT and OT work together. This concept of think global, act local really becomes more important, because no longer can I say I'm just separated from IT and therefore I don't need to worry about this. I now have IT transmitting back and forth between. And so therefore, this notion of getting that data up to a centralized repository so we can think globally and bring that data together with our IT systems data and start to develop insights together. But then importantly, have that act local part so that when the actions start happening, we don't have a bunch of inbound actions coming. We could, right? Theoretically, with this new connectivity, all of a sudden you could have people say, great, I'll just push patches from central, or I'll change configuration centrally. And our strong view is we don't want to get there in most operations. Maybe there are some that do, don't get me wrong. It's not every case. But most cases, particularly process industries, right? We want to be real careful before we start making those changes, hence the act local piece. And then one of the other questions was how to apply this in brownfield versus greenfield. Our experience is, like 90% brownfield. Most of our clients are trying to fit security into an existing operation. And so frankly, this whole concept we're talking about, this whole governance model we're talking about, is primarily in those brownfield environments, right? Where operations has been running in a certain way for a long time, back to that whole strategic dimension here, right? The world is changing for them, right? The competitive dynamic changes, not because of their traditional competitors, but because now it's a competitor, from a foreign country whose goal is to take you offline. And that whole dynamic changes now a brownfield operation, right? It's no longer, okay, as long as I kind of keep things going, I'm good. No, now I'm going to be attacked. And how do I defend against that attack? Which changes the pace, it changes the alignment, changes the urgency, and therefore probably changes the way we think about structure, style, et cetera. So with that, I hope everyone has a great holiday season. We'll be doing our next webinar in probably a January timeframe. We'll be getting that out pretty soon. We welcome everyone's comments and questions after the fact. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out both the tape of this, not tape, but the recording of this, as well as the document that we walked through. Hope it was helpful for everybody. Please do reach out with any other questions, and have a happy holiday season. Thanks so much.